I want you to completely wipe the slate clean and picture a world that looks completely different from ours today. Imagine an ancient world that was entirely united. No competing religions, no divided beliefs, just one single community that knew and worshipped one creator, Allah. They totally understood that everything in the heavens and on the earth belonged completely to him. But, slowly, something shifted, and that tiny, subtle shift, it would end up setting the stage for literally one of the most dramatic historical tests humanity has ever faced. So let's establish our historical baseline. After Prophet Adam, peace be upon him, human beings started to multiply, right? They spread out across the earth, and the Qur'an points out that, at first, humanity was just one community. They initially stayed firmly on the path of truth, living in total harmony with the knowledge of their creator. But as time went on, dangerous differences and deviations started to sort of creep into their societies. That pure, unadulterated worship of one God, it was starting to become seriously clouded. Which brings us to a really fascinating question. And honestly, it's the question that frames our entire explainer today. How exactly did humanity lose its way? How do you go from a society that is fully aware of a single, all-powerful creator to one where people are literally bowing down to statues carved out of wood and stone? Well, it definitely didn't happen overnight. To really understand this fall, we have to look at the specifics. The Quran actually gives us the exact names of the 5 idols that became the center of this new, corrupt belief system. We're talking about Wad, Suwa, Yaguth, Ya'uk, and Nasr. And these weren't just passing fads. The people became fiercely protective of these idols, flat out refusing to abandon them, even when they were staring undeniable truth right in the face. But where did these names even come from in the first place? It's what we can call the slow creep of shirk, or associating partners with Allah. Based on an authentic narration recorded by Imam Bukhari, this scholar Ibn Abbas explained that these 5 names originally belonged to righteous, pious men who actually lived among the people. When they died, Satan inspired their communities to build memorials simply to honor them. And at first it was totally innocent. No one was worshiping them. But as generations passed away and new ones were born, the original purpose of these memorials was just forgotten. And eventually, innocent remembrance had completely morphed into literal idol worship. Now, to ground this in our physical world, you might be wondering where this all actually went down. While the exact city or country isn't explicitly named in the Quran, historical works often associate this epic narrative with the vast, ancient landscapes of the Mesopotamian region. So, while we definitely treat this as a strong historical possibility rather than a confirmed Quranic location, it really helps us visualize the ancient, developing societies where this immense spiritual crisis was unfolding. Section 1. The first messenger arrives. With society now deeply steeped in idol worship, the pure truth of monotheism was practically extinguished, so Allah intervened by sending a guide to the people of the earth. And this brings us to Prophet Nuh, peace be upon him. Authentic narrations from Bukhari and Muslim highlight his totally unique status. He was the very first earthly messenger sent by Allah. Interestingly enough, Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, mentioned that Nuh was called a grateful servant of Allah. Just try to imagine the emotional fortitude of a man who would spend centuries facing overwhelming rejection, yet his absolute defining characteristic remained immense gratitude to his Lord. His core message was breathtakingly streamlined. He simply said, "O my people, worship Allah. You have no God other than Him." Against that incredibly complicated, cluttered backdrop of 5 different idols, memorials, and complex social rituals, Nuh's message cut right through the noise. It wasn't about gaining wealth or securing political power or achieving fame. It was just a pure, singular call back to the truth. But of course, society didn't react the way you'd hope, right? The social dynamics immediately fractured. On one side, you had the arrogant leaders of society. They completely dismissed Nuh. They mocked him, saying, "You are only a human being like us." They were just way too attached to their status and their idols. But on the other side, the devoted followers who actually listened to Nuh were overwhelmingly the weak and the poor of society. Nuh didn't care about their social standing for a second. He only cared that they recognized the truth. Moving on to part 2, a millennia of struggle. Let's see how this builds into an unimaginable scale of dedication and, honestly, psychological warfare. Nuh was absolutely relentless. If you've ever tried to convince a friend or a family member of something for just like a few weeks and felt completely exhausted, imagine this. Nuh tried every possible method to reach his people. He called them during the daylight hours, he called them in the dark of night. He stood up and spoke to them in crowded public gatherings, and he pulled them aside for quiet, private conversations. He left absolutely no stone unturned. And the contrast in behavior here is just staggering. You have Nuh's desperate, caring attempts to save his people on one hand, juxtaposed with their arrogant, almost childish physical reactions on the other. The Qur'an actually tells us that they would literally jam their fingers into their ears so they wouldn't have to hear his voice. They would cover their faces and bodies with their clothes to avoid even looking at him. Instead of engaging with his logic, they just ran further and further into their own arrogance. Okay, we really need to pause here and just let this massive number sink in. 950. The Qur'an specifically states that Nuh remained among his people for 1,000 years less 50. That is 950 years of waking up every single day, calling people toward Allah, and facing constant, crushing rejection. Entire generations were born, lived their whole lives, and died mocking him. And yet, he just kept going. So, what does this all mean for us? The absolutely crucial takeaway here is a profound lesson in intention versus outcome. Success in the eyes of Allah is measured by your unwavering faithfulness to the truth, not by the immediate results you happen to see. Think about it. Nuh preached for nearly a millennium and gained only a small group of followers. Yet he is considered one of the greatest messengers in all of human history because he never, ever compromised his duty. Which brings us to part 3, the final warning. After centuries of immense patience, we hit a dramatic turning point. The people actually decide to brazenly challenge the very punishment they've been warned about. The leader's reaction was just the ultimate display of ego. Instead of reflecting, they basically demand their own destruction. They look at Nuh and challenge him, saying, "If you were telling the truth, then bring the punishment you keep warning us about." It is a shocking level of spiritual blindness. Nuh calmly replies that only Allah controls the punishment, totally stripping away any illusion that this is just a personal battle between him and them. It's entirely between them and their creator. In response to this absolute rejection and their crazy demands for punishment, Allah steps in with a final warning. But it comes in the form of a bizarre and extraordinary command to Nuh. He is told to build a ship, a huge, massive ship. And here's the kicker: build it on dry land. There was no flood yet. There weren't even storm clouds in the sky. To the arrogant onlookers, this must have looked completely insane. But Nuh? He begins building this massive ark immediately. He doesn't argue. He doesn't ask for a meteorological report. This highlights a staggering level of faith. It shows us the profound power of obeying your creator even before you see the rain. When the command comes from Allah, you don't need to have every single detail mapped out in your head before you start taking action. So, as the massive wooden planks are gathered, as the structure begins to tower over the dry land, and as the mockery from the people reaches an absolute fever pitch, we are left with a burning question. Why build a massive ship before the rain even begins? What exactly happens to those arrogant leaders, the weak followers, and the idols they so fiercely protected when the first unimaginable drop of water finally falls from the sky? Well, that is something you'll have to ponder as we wrap up this explainer on Prophet Nuh's incredible early struggle.
Picture a cinematic, ancient world. The sun is just beating down on a dry, unforgiving, incredibly dusty landscape. And right there, smack in the middle of this vast, arid expanse, a man is doing something that seems, well, entirely out of place. He's building a massive ship. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here for this explainer, because today we're going to explore one of the most dramatic and epic narratives preserved in the Qur'an. We're talking about the story of Prophet Nuh, or Noah, the Ark, and the Great Flood. We're going to stick strictly to the source material here to understand the fascinating sequence of events, the precise divine commands given, and a deeply, deeply emotional moment that happens right as the world is literally turning upside down.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the people living there at the time. Imagine seeing something that makes absolutely zero logical sense. You're looking at the construction of a colossal vessel, but there's no flood. There's no storm brewing on the horizon. There isn't even a sea nearby that you can actually see. And the man building it, it's the exact same man who's been warning your community of a coming disaster for years. As the source describes, the people's reaction was exactly what you might expect. They laughed. They mocked him relentlessly.
Now, what's truly fascinating here is the complete collision of two very different realities. The leaders of his people looked at him and just saw pure madness. I mean, they saw a guy wasting his life building a boat in the desert. But Nuh, he saw something else entirely. He wasn't building this out of some sudden personal hobby. He was acting on a direct divine revelation. Allah had told him exactly what was coming, commanding him to build the ark under divine care and guidance, and warning him that the decision to drown the wrongdoers had already been firmly made. There was no going back.
And this brilliant psychological pressure brings out an incredible response from Prophet Nuh. In the Qur'an, he responds to their laughter with a pretty chilling statement. He says, "If you mock us now, we will certainly mock you later, just as you mock us." And this brilliantly illustrates that this wasn't arrogance on his part. It wasn't him just throwing a petty insult back at his bullies. It was a grave, deeply serious warning of an invisible reality. You see, they were laughing because they couldn't see the coming disaster, but he was grounded entirely in obedience to Allah's command. Eventually, the construction was complete, and Allah gave incredibly strict instructions for the passenger manifest. First, Nuh was commanded to take into the ark a pair from every kind of animal. Second, his family, but with an absolutely crucial exception, those against whom the decree of punishment had already been made. And third, the believers. But the text explicitly notes something fascinating here. The believers who entered the ark were only a few. Out of a whole society warned for years and years, only a tiny fraction were actually saved.
When we look at this text, we really have to strip away centuries of extra folklore. The Quran gives absolutely no specific numbers regarding exactly how many believers there were. It doesn't give us the precise dimensions in cubits or tell us the specific type of wood used. So the crucial point is, by skipping all that interpretive fluff, we get to the absolute core of the narrative. Nuh and those who believed were saved, and those who rejected the warning were not. Simple as that.
With the ark ready and the passengers designated, Nuh was basically waiting for one specific catalyst, a sign. And that sign was the tanur. The tanur was an oven, and the divine instruction was that when the command finally came, this oven would miraculously burst and just gush with water. Think about how completely unexpected that is for a second. Water erupting from an oven, a place of fire and baking. The sudden eruption of water from the tanur was the definitive, undeniable signal that the time for warnings was completely over. The flood was beginning. The very moment that sign arrived, the believers and the animals were gathered. It must have been a profoundly solemn and, frankly, terrifying moment. For years, the reality of this event had been denied by the world, but now it was actively unfolding right in front of them. As they prepared to face the absolute unknown, Nuh instructed them, "Board it. In the name of Allah is its sailing and its anchoring." He followed this by affirming that his Lord is forgiving and merciful. It was just a total, complete surrender to divine will as the reality they had prepared for finally arrived.
And then, the sky changed. And we're not talking about an ordinary storm or a typical seasonal monsoon here. The language used in the Quran to describe this is absolute and totally overwhelming. So we open the gates of heaven with pouring rain. The tone shifts here, right? It shifts to one of dark, inescapable chaos. The water cascading from the sky wasn't just falling, it was as if the very gates of the heavens had been literally unsealed, releasing a terrifying, unrelenting onslaught of water from above.
But the danger wasn't only coming from the sky. The text continues, "We caused the earth to burst forth with springs." Water was erupting from below as well. The ground itself was fracturing and gushing water upward, meeting that torrential downpour from above. It created an inescapable trap. For those who had laughed and mocked Nuh in the dry desert, the very earth and sky they relied on were now closing in on them. The flood began rapidly rising, lifting the massive ark right up with it.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because amidst this epic, macro-scale global destruction, the narrative dramatically slows down. It zooms right in on one incredibly intimate, heartbreaking family moment. As the ark begins to actually move through the rising water, Nuh looks out and sees someone he deeply, deeply loves outside the safety of the vessel. It's one of his own sons.
You really have to imagine the scene here. The roar of the pouring rain, the rushing water tearing up from the earth, the sheer chaos all around. And over all of that noise, a father yelling out a desperate plea. Nuh calls out to him, "Oh, my son, come aboard with us and do not be with the disbelievers." It is a frantic, agonizing moment. Nuh is a mighty prophet of God, yes, but right here in this verse, he is simply a father, begging to save his child from certain doom.
But his son yells back, "I will take refuge on a mountain, it will protect me from the water." And this just perfectly highlights the son's tragic flaw.
Even as the miraculous punishment unfolds exactly as his father had warned, he is still relying on physical, earthly protection. He looks at a mountain and thinks earthly geography can save him, entirely failing to submit to the reality of a divine command. It's a really powerful reminder of how often we as people cling to material, earthly securities when we're facing much larger spiritual realities.
Nuh hears this, and the realization of what is about to happen must have just been absolutely crushing. He answers back, "Today there is no protection from Allah's command, except for those upon whom He has mercy." Nuh knows that the mountain won't help. He knows that salvation today is exclusively tied to faith and obedience to Allah, not to physical high ground, and tragically, not even to bloodlines or family relationships.
And as that heavy truth hangs in the air, a huge wave came between them, and the son was among those who drowned. The text doesn't drag this out. It presents the sudden, absolute finality of the moment. 1 second they are speaking, and the very next, a literal wall of water ends the conversation and ends a life, leaving the grieving father inside the ark.
Beyond that intimate tragedy, the sheer, epic scale of the flood takes over again. The ark is now fully at the mercy of the water. The Qur'an describes the sea they were navigating as having waves like mountains. Just conceptualize the sheer, unimaginably massive scale of these waves for a second. The people who had mocked the idea of a boat in the desert were now buried beneath an ocean so violent it was forming its own mountainous geography.
But while the world around them was being swallowed whole, inside the ark were the few believers, Noah, his surviving family, and the animals, and they were completely safe. The ark sailed steadily under divine care right through these mountainous waves. Its ultimate destination wasn't arbitrary either. It was sailing toward a specific location, a mountain whose name the Qur'an would preserve forever, Al-Judi, a place of final rest and safety amidst total, unbelievable destruction.
But as our explainer comes to a close today, we're actually left right in the middle of the raging storm. The ark is still moving, the floodwaters are still churning violently outside, and the survivors inside are left waiting, asking one vital question. When would Allah finally command the earth to swallow this endless water? And what exactly will the world look like when the storm finally breaks? That is a cliffhanger that truly leaves you in awe of the sheer power of this narrative. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep analyzing, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.
Okay, let's dive right into this explainer by stepping into the profound, absolute calm that followed the most terrifying storm in human history. I mean, imagine being surrounded by endless, raging water for so long, and then the deafening roar of the waves finally silences. Today we're looking at the aftermath of the Great Flood and the deeply moving lessons Prophet Nuh, peace be upon him, learned when those waters finally receded. It's a story not just about physical survival, but about defining what truly matters when the storm clears. Now, what's really fascinating is how this massive, earth-shattering event actually wraps up. Notice how the epic flood doesn't just end by chance, or, through some gradual shift in weather patterns. It ends through a direct, immediate command from Allah. Quote, "O earth, swallow your water, and O sky, withhold your rain," unquote. The elements of nature are completely submitted to the divine decree. The very earth that burst open with springs and the sky that literally poured down torrents are instantly brought to a halt. So, after years of enduring relentless mockery from his people, followed by the absolute roaring chaos of those waves, we arrive at this incredible moment of divine fulfillment. The decree was fulfilled and the ark stopped. Just imagine the ancient waters receding and the sheer overwhelming relief that must have washed over the believers inside. And the ark didn't just wash up aimlessly on some random shore, right? It was guided so precisely to its designated resting place, showing us that every single moment of that terrifying journey was under absolute perfect control.
Which brings us to a really fascinating question. Where exactly is Mount Al-Judi? The Quran gives us this specific name for the resting place of the ark. But today, the exact geographical coordinates? Well, they're still shrouded in a lot of mystery.
And this brilliantly illustrates a profound lesson about claiming historical certainty. See, various historical traditions often guess at exact modern coordinates, linking the location to the modern-day borders of Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. But without reliable concrete evidence, these remain just that, historical estimates. On the other hand, we have our anchor, Quranic certainty. The safest, absolute, most factual statement we can make is simply trusting the Quran's exact word, that the ark securely rested on Al-Judi. We really don't need to force modern coordinates onto ancient miracles to validate them.
Section 1. The heavy heart of a prophet.
We so often think of the flood's end purely as a massive, triumphant victory. But actually, even with the flood over and his survival guaranteed, Nuh carried a devastating, incredibly heavy grief. Yes, he was safe, but he was also a father mourning his drowned son. The Qur'an captures this beautifully. "My Lord, surely my son is of my family, and your promise is certainly true." This plea just illustrates the raw heartbreak of a father gently asking Allah about his biological child. Remember, before the flood, Allah promised to save Nuh's family. So here, in a moment of just unimaginable grief, Nuh respectfully calls out, holding on to that promise. It's such a beautifully human moment, showing us the immense depth of a prophet's love and sorrow.
So the absolutely crucial point here is that Allah responds by teaching Nuh a heavy but incredibly vital lesson about salvation and relationships. "O Nuh, he is certainly not of your family. His conduct was unrighteous." Now, this isn't denying the biological connection. It's fundamentally redefining what family truly means in the eyes of the divine when it comes to the promise of ultimate salvation.
And this brings us to a real game-changer of a concept: family in faith. It shows us that the special promise of salvation is strictly bound to faith and righteousness, not merely bloodlines or genetics. This is a massive shift in perspective. It literally means that a rejection of ultimate truth fractures even the closest, most intimate biological ties. True spiritual family is a profound connection built entirely on a shared foundation of belief and trust in Allah.
So how does one even react to such a profound, heart-wrenching correction? Well, when confronted with this divine truth, we see the true measure of a prophet. There's no argument, there's zero ego, just immediate, total humility. He doesn't let pride take over, and he certainly doesn't debate the decree. Despite his immense grief as a father, he instantly submits to Allah's perfect knowledge.
He perfectly captures this submission, saying, "My Lord, I seek refuge in you from asking you about something I have no knowledge of." He follows this right up by asking for forgiveness and mercy, fully recognizing his utter dependence on Allah. Nuh's instant prayer here is just a beautiful, actionable takeaway for us. It shows us exactly how to gracefully accept divine wisdom, even when it directly conflicts with what our own heavy hearts desperately want to understand.
Section 2, A New Chapter for Humanity. Zooming back out from this deeply personal, emotional moment, the narrative shifts toward the horizon. The storm has passed, the earth has been cleansed, and Allah ushers in a completely new beginning for the surviving believers. Imagine the sheer overwhelming relief of hearing this divine command. "O Nuh, disembark with our peace and blessings upon you." After a harrowing journey confined to the ark, they're finally stepping out onto dry land. And not just stepping out, but stepping out wrapped in absolute peace and divine blessings. The centuries of rejection, the mocking crowds, the terrifying flood, all of that era is left entirely behind. It is a pure, unblemished, fresh start for humanity. Looking back at this monumental event, though, we have to ask ourselves a pretty challenging question. Was it the ark that made him successful? It's really easy to look at the towering wooden hull, this massive physical structure, and attribute his survival entirely to it. But how do we truly measure the success of a mission that lasted nearly a millennium?
The reality, the ark was a tool. It was literally merely a means to an end. True success wasn't measured by the vessel itself. The real metrics were faith, unwavering obedience, and absolute trust in Allah. Noah didn't measure his success by popularity, crowd size, or how many followers he gathered over those hundreds of years. He measured it by his unyielding obedience to his Creator, completely regardless of the immediate, tangible results. And honestly, this is the core takeaway you should carry with you from today's explainer. Success is not about how many people follow you, it is simply staying with the truth. Even if people laugh at you, even if you are totally ridiculed, or even if you have to stand entirely alone, choosing the truth and remaining firm upon it is the ultimate enduring victory. Noah is remembered centuries later, blessed among all peoples, exactly because he never compromised that truth.
As we close out this explainer, we are left with a lingering, truly fascinating question. The Quran tells us that Nuh, peace be upon him, preached for 950 years. I mean, what exactly happened during those mysterious centuries before the rain ever fell? How in the world did he maintain that incredible stamina in the face of constant rejection? It's a vast mystery of resilience that we absolutely must uncover in our next analysis. Let's just jump right into this. I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine spending your absolute entire life trying to help people. You're explaining things to them, and they just turn away. You warn them of a massive danger, and they actually mock you.
You reach out again, and they just become even more stubborn. It's an incredibly heavy emotional burden to carry, right? Well, today, we are exploring the extraordinary mission of Prophet Nuh, also known as Noah, peace be upon him. And as you'll see, we are going to witness a level of resilience and steadfastness that is almost impossible to wrap our heads around.
Now, when we think of a really long, frustrating project, we might think of, 10 years? Maybe a full human lifetime of 80 or 100 years. But Prophet Nuh's mission wasn't a decade. It wasn't a century. It was 950 years. Let that staggeringly massive timeline sink in for a second. 950 years of relentless calling, preaching, and trying to guide his people. Think about how many generations that is. He's literally watching great-great-grandchildren grow up with the exact same hostility as their ancestors.
So what exactly was he saying to them for nearly a millennium? His message was actually beautifully simple. Worship Allah alone. And he took this profoundly balanced approach. He didn't just frighten them. Yes, of course, he delivered a firm warning of a painful punishment if they kept up their destructive, arrogant ways. But right alongside that, he offered immense, beautiful hope. He told them that if they simply sought Allah's forgiveness, they would be absolutely showered with mercy. We're talking abundant rain, increased wealth, children, and lush gardens with flowing rivers. It really was this perfect harmony of fear and hope.
And he didn't just deliver this message once, dust off his hands, and walk away. Prophet Nuh systematically exhausted absolutely every single method of communication. He called them by day. He called them by night. When that didn't work, he invited them publicly in these major gatherings. And then he also went to them privately, sitting down and speaking to them one-on-one with such gentleness and sincerity. He went through this relentless cycle for centuries. He never once threw his hands up and said, you know what, they don't want to listen, so I'm done.
But how did the people respond to all this dedication? Instead of listening, they just dug their heels in. The Qur'an describes a scene where they literally jammed their fingers into their ears so they wouldn't have to hear his voice. They actually pulled their garments up over their heads to block him out visually. They became so incredibly arrogant. And the absolute crucial point here is that their problem was not a lack of evidence. The message wasn't unclear. This was just pure, stubborn pride. They flat out did not want to accept the truth.
And this pride was heavily tied up in social class. The arrogant leaders of Nuh's people had a massive problem. They looked down on the sincere followers of Nuh simply because those followers were seen as poor and weak. The elites are sitting there thinking, how on earth can these lowly people be the ones who are right? They essentially demanded that Nuh push away his sincere believers just to appease them. But Nuh wasn't having it. He firmly refused. He made it crystal clear that Allah does not measure a person's worth by their wealth, their social position, or how much worldly power they have. So the tension just keeps building and building until it hits a boiling point. The rejection becomes so intense that they actively try to silence him entirely. They're arguing, they're throwing insults, and then they issue this terrifying challenge. They say, "Bring us what you threatened us with, if you were truthful." They were so blinded by their own arrogance and so utterly sick of his centuries of preaching that they essentially dared him to drop the divine punishment right on their heads.
Now, Prophet Nuh's response here, it perfectly highlights his incredible humility. He didn't lose his temper or claim he had some magical power to destroy them on command. He calmly replies that the punishment is with Allah, and if Allah wishes to delay it, there is no escaping him. He recognized his role perfectly. He was only a messenger. He doesn't control the elements, the timing, and the ultimate consequences belonged entirely to the Creator.
Okay, so after 950 years of day and night, public and private, deeply sincere effort, we have to ask a really difficult question. How many people actually believed? If you were to guess the results of nearly a millennium of non-stop dedicated effort by a prophet of God, what would your number be? Thousands? Millions? An entire nation completely transformed? The staggering truth is that the Qur'an describes those who believed as few, literally just a few. And honestly, this completely shatters our modern metric-obsessed framework. Today, we're constantly measuring success by numbers, right? How many followers do you have? How many views? How many likes? But Nuh's mission gives us this massive paradigm shift. True success isn't about popularity at all. Success is steadfast obedience to Allah and speaking the truth. Your responsibility is the sincere effort. The actual guidance of hearts belongs to Allah. The truth does not become less true just because only a handful of people decide to follow it. Eventually, this epic timeline hits a devastating, climactic moment. Allah informs Nuh, none of your people will believe except those who have already believed.
Just imagine hearing those words. After 9.5 centuries of pouring your heart and soul into these people, the door is officially closed. The mission of preaching had finally reached its end. No one else was going to change their mind. It was only at this point, right after that definitive decree from Allah, that Prophet Nuh makes an incredibly powerful dua or supplication. He prays, "My Lord, do not leave a single disbeliever on earth." Now, context is absolutely vital here. This wasn't some angry, knee-jerk reaction to a random insult. This justified prayer came after centuries of persistent rejection, and importantly, only after Allah had confirmed that these people would absolutely never believe, and that leaving them would only produce more wicked, ungrateful generations who would just mislead others.
And then came the epic, definitive command from Allah. 3 words that changed the course of human history. Build the ark. The narrative completely shifts in an instant. The time for convincing people? That was over. The time for preparing for a catastrophic consequence had officially begun. Nuh obeyed, and he got to work building. But before we wrap up this explainer, we really need to connect this ancient history to ourselves, right here, right now. The story of Nuh is so much deeper than just an ancient flood. It's a direct warning about human psychology. It's asking us, what is our personal ultimate test? When the truth reaches us today, how do we respond? Do we humble ourselves, or do we act exactly like the elites of Nuh's time and become arrogant? When we're confronted with a hard truth, do we say, Allah knows best, or do we metaphorically stick our fingers in our ears and say, nope, I don't want to hear it?
The people of Nuh had generations upon generations of warnings, but their rejection became absolute. And then the punishment finally came. Prophet Nuh followed his command and he built that massive ark. But that leaves us with a truly terrifying question. What exactly happens when the earth and the sky literally tear open? How immense were those waves that the Qur'an describes, and what was the ultimate fate of that ark tossing around in the floodwaters? Well, we're going to uncover all of that in the next chapter of this explainer. Until then, keep reflecting and stay focused.
For literally hundreds of years, Prophet Nuh, peace be upon him, warned his people. He faced endless mockery, laughter, and outright rejection. But today in our explainer, we're jumping right into the breathtaking, cinematic climax of that monumental struggle. The warnings are over, the ark is built, and the earth, as humanity knew it, is about to change forever.
Just listen to how suddenly and intensely this begins. The Qur'an states, "So we opened the gates of heaven with pouring rain, and we caused the earth to burst forth with springs." Try to imagine that terrifying moment. The world didn't just get a heavy thunderstorm. The very mechanics of nature were instantly inverted. The water that was meant to nurture life was now acting to completely dismantle it.
What's truly fascinating here is the sheer scale of it all. We're looking at a dual-source phenomenon. You have water pouring endlessly from the opened gates of heaven above, and springs violently bursting forth from the earth below. The sky and the earth, 2 completely separate domains, synchronize perfectly to release an unimaginable, cataclysmic volume of water, and all of it coordinated by a single divine command. The flood was no longer just a distant warning preached by an old man. It was reality. Think about the utter shock of that. The exact same people who spent generations laughing at Nuh, treating the very idea of a flood as this massive, ridiculous joke, well, they were suddenly witnessing the absolute destruction of their world. The time for arguments and mockery? Instantly over.
But right in the middle of this watery chaos, there's the ark. The Qur'an says, "So we inspired him, build the ark under our watchful care and our inspiration." This is a crucial detail, right? It illustrates that the ark wasn't just some impressive piece of ancient engineering floating on sheer luck. No guesswork here. It was designed, constructed, and protected entirely through God's direct inspiration and watchful care.
And then it was time. Nuh proclaims, "Board it, in the name of Allah as it's sailing and it's anchoring." What an incredibly energetic and powerful command. The believers, the designated pairs of creatures, they all make their way aboard. That exact same wooden structure the whole town used to laugh at is now their only lifeline. The doors are sealed, and literally, the most incredible journey in human history begins. And it sailed with them on waves like mountains. I want you to really try and visualize the sheer scale here. We aren't talking about rough seas. We're talking about an environment completely swallowed by mountain-sized waves. The overwhelming, crushing magnitude of that water is hard to even wrap our heads around. Yet right through these towering walls of water, the ark moved securely. But right in the middle of this earth-shattering cataclysm, the narrative pauses for something incredibly intimate. Just imagine being a father,
Put yourself in those shoes for a second. You're safe inside, but you look out into this absolute disaster, surrounded by those terrifying mountain-like waves, and you see your own son standing outside, completely exposed to the wrath of the flood.
The words he calls out are just devastating. "Oh, my son, come aboard with us and do not be with the disbelievers." We aren't just hearing a prophet delivering a message here. We are witnessing a desperate, heartbroken father making one final, agonizing plea over the roar of the ocean. It's his absolute last attempt to save his child.
But then we hear the son's tragic, flawed response. "I will take refuge on a mountain. It will protect me from the water." This highlights his fatal flaw so perfectly. He's looking at a divine punishment and trying to apply standard human logic to it. He actually thinks a physical object, a mountain, can protect him against an event commanded by the creator of that very mountain.
Nuh counters that flawed logic immediately with an absolute, undeniable truth. He says, "Today there is no protection from Allah's command except for those upon whom He has mercy." No mountain, no fortress, no amount of human ingenuity was going to save anyone that day. Protection was no longer physical. It was purely spiritual, completely dependent on divine mercy.
And then a massive wave came between them. Just like that, quickly, silently, decisively. The conversation ends abruptly as the son is swallowed by the waters, drowning among the disbelievers. It's a staggering, heartbreaking moment of loss dropped right into the dead center of this epic story of salvation. A father watching his son vanish into the very waves he tried to save him from.
Now, before we move forward, it's really interesting to notice what the source material deliberately leaves out. The exact dimensions of the ark? Unverified. The specific type of wood used? Unknown. The text doesn't even name Nuh's son. Why? Because focusing on trivia distracts us. We shouldn't get caught up in unverified facts or names reported later on. The narrative strips all that away to focus our attention entirely on the profound spiritual lesson. So, shifting back to the ark itself, the journey continues through these terrifying waters. The Qur'an tells us, "So we saved him and those with him in the ark." Despite the profound heartbreak of losing a son, the promise made to Nuh was absolutely fulfilled. While those mountain-like waves raged outside, destroying everything, inside that divinely inspired vessel, the chosen believers were safely and miraculously protected.
Eventually, the very elements that caused this immense destruction are commanded to stop. And the description here is just majestic. And it was said, "O earth, swallow up your water, and O sky, withhold your rain." The exact same supreme authority that commanded the waters to violently rise now issues a single simple command, and it instantly ends. The rain stops, and the earth just absorbs the flood. And then we get this profoundly peaceful resolution. And the ark rested on Al-Judi. The terrifying flood was finally over. The raging, mountain-like waves were gone, replaced by a calm stillness stretching across the horizon. The water disappeared, and the great ark safely touched down. Noah and the believers had survived the greatest physical trial of their lives, and the earth was finally quiet again. Following this, a new command is given. "O Nuh, disembark with our peace and blessings upon you, and some of the descendants of those with you." What a beautiful, relieving moment that must have been. After literally centuries of intense struggle and endless rejection, and then surviving a cataclysmic global flood, there's finally peace. It's the stunning beginning of an entirely new chapter for humanity. So what should we actually take away from all this? This isn't just a story about a massive flood, a giant boat, or water covering the earth. It is fundamentally a story about absolute obedience. The true core of this historical event is an awe-inspiring display of faith. It's about a group of people willing to listen to a divine command, even when the entire world thought they'd lost their minds. Let's really break down this core takeaway: obedience before understanding. Think about it. Noah spent years building a massive ship on dry land before he ever saw a single drop of rain. He was trusting the unseen over the visible. He obeyed before seeing the final result, prioritizing absolute faith over basic human logic. And that's exactly what saved them. Sometimes you won't see the full picture, but you trust the one who knows what you cannot see.
But, there's one final lingering thread to this narrative. The heartbreaking loss of Nuh's son teaches us a harsh but absolutely critical reality. Family lineage alone was not enough to guarantee salvation. Being the son of a great prophet, growing up in that very house, none of it granted him a free pass when he chose to reject faith and rely on a physical mountain instead of his creator.
Which leads us to a final, lingering question. Nuh survived, but he lost his son, and he obviously had questions about it. Why was the son of a prophet not saved? What was the answer given to this grieving father, and what does this deeply emotional exchange teach us about the complex dynamics of faith, family, and ultimate salvation? Well, that is exactly what we're going to uncover in our next explainer. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.
Stepping directly into the quiet, honestly devastating aftermath of the Great Flood. The sky has finally cleared. The deafening roar of the waters, it's completely faded into this absolute heavy silence. The ark has come to rest on Mount Al-Judi. Nuh, peace be upon him, and the believers have survived the unimaginable. The physical storm is finally over, but for Nuh, well, an entirely different kind of storm was just brewing within his own heart. Think about this for a second. The flood was over, yes, but Noah had just lost his son. I really want you to sit with that contrast for a moment. Take a second to feel the sheer weight of it. On one hand, you've got the ultimate physical salvation, right? The believers were miraculously rescued from total global destruction. But on that exact same day, in that exact same moment, you have the deep, agonizing internal turmoil of a grieving father. His own flesh and blood, a boy he literally raised, had rejected the message, completely refused to get on the ark, and drowned in the rising waters right before his very eyes. And now, after everything that just went down, standing in the quiet of this newly washed world, Noah turns to Allah. The Qur'an, specifically in chapter 11, verse 45, captures this deeply, deeply human moment. It's a father's plea. He says, "My Lord, surely my son is of my family, and your promise is certainly true." Now, look closely at those words and the tone behind them. Noah isn't challenging Allah here, not at all. He's not rebelling or lashing out in anger. You see, Allah had previously promised to save his family, except for those against whom the decree had already been made. So Noah is, respectfully and incredibly humbly, asking about this promise. Yes, he's a mighty prophet of God, absolutely, but he's also a father, trying to process a painful emotional reality that probably hasn't fully clicked into place for him yet. Then comes Allah's answer. And the gravity of this response, it's absolutely monumental. Allah says, "O Nuh, he is certainly not of your family. His conduct was unrighteous." This verse is it's a huge moment in the history of revelation. Allah isn't denying the biological reality here. He's not saying this man wasn't Nuh's genetic son. What Allah is revealing with crystal clear certainty is that just being the biological child of a prophet didn't automatically make him a believer. Because of his persistent rejection and his wrongful actions, he was entirely excluded from the spiritual family that was promised salvation. And this brings us right to a core, incredibly powerful lesson. There is a massive, eternal difference between your biological family and your true family. Think about it. Throughout ancient history, and even today, honestly, we place immense value on biological family. We rely on bloodlines, earthly ties, tribal connections, family background, the whole shebang. People often believed that your lineage basically guaranteed your status. But true family, at least in the eyes of Allah, is based on righteousness. It's about spiritual obedience and personal choice. A blood relationship alone was never going to be enough. You simply cannot inherit faith through your family's DNA, no matter who your family is. I mean, even if your father is literally one of the greatest, most patient prophets to ever walk the earth, it doesn't grant you a free pass. Every single individual, without exception, has to actively choose to believe and obey Allah for themselves. The verse then continues with Allah saying, "Do not ask me about what you have no knowledge of." Now, this gives us a beautiful, sobering insight into the nature of the prophets. They were the absolute best of people, no doubt about it. They received direct divine revelation. They performed miracles by God's leave. But they only knew what Allah taught them. They didn't independently know the unseen. Nuh didn't know the ultimate spiritual state, the inner condition of the heart, or the final divine decree regarding his son. That level of absolute, perfect knowledge, that belongs exclusively to Allah. So how does Nuh respond to this direct correction from the Creator? Verse 47 reveals his immediate reaction. He says, "My Lord, I seek refuge in you from asking you about something I have no knowledge of. Unless you forgive me and have mercy on me, I will be among the losers." Just listen to the sheer humility vibrating in those words. He doesn't get defensive. He doesn't argue or try to insist that his earthly logic or his intense pain as a grieving father justifies his question. Instead, he instantly recognizes the limit of his knowledge. He demonstrates true submission by fully accepting Allah's correction and immediately begging for mercy. It's this stunning, timeless display of what it really means to be a true servant of Allah. The absolute crucial takeaway here is summed up perfectly in Surah Al-An'am. No soul burdened with sin will bear the burden of another. Look, Nuh was a prophet of the highest possible caliber, yet his wife is mentioned elsewhere in the Qur'an as an example of disbelief, and his son totally rejected the truth. Meanwhile, sitting right there on that ark were believers who shared absolutely zero blood relation with him, but they were saved because of their faith. And this broadens the lesson for all of us today. We so often fall into the trap of thinking our associations will somehow save us. Don't get me wrong, a righteous family is a beautiful blessing. Having pious parents or a devoted spouse is wonderful. But relationships with prophets, scholars, or having a righteous lineage can never, ever replace personal faith, personal action, and your individual responsibility before God. After this profound, deeply humbling conversation, a brand new chapter begins. Allah tells Nuh, "O Nuh, disembark with our peace and blessings upon you and some of the descendants of those with you." The flood is officially over. The doors of the ark are finally opening. The survivors are stepping out onto the solid ground of Mount Al-Judi, breathing the fresh air of a completely changed world. It's a fresh start for humanity, deeply grounded in divine peace and blessings for those who actively chose belief. So you might be wondering, why exactly is the story of Nuh repeated in so many places throughout the Qur'an? Well, it's because it contains these universal, absolutely foundational lessons for every single generation. It teaches us Tawheed, the absolute oneness of God. It shows us what unimaginable, unbroken patience looks like in the face of literally centuries of rejection. It demonstrates relentless Dawah, just constantly inviting others to the truth. It entirely redefines the concept of family, like we just talked about. It demands absolute obedience. It requires unwavering trust in Allah. He built a giant ship on dry land. And it acts as a severe warning against the fatal danger of arrogance. The Qur'an reminds us that within this story are signs, and that humanity is constantly being tested. This isn't just some piece of ancient history. It's a mirror for our own lives right now. It forces us to ask ourselves, when the truth finally reaches us, what are we going to do with it? 950. That is the staggering, honestly almost incomprehensible number of years that Nuh spent among his people preaching the message. Just pause and imagine that for a second. 950 years. That's nearly a millennium of day and night, public and private pleading. 950 years of enduring constant, bitter rejection, physical and emotional mockery, and deep, deep isolation. And yet, through all those centuries, his resolve never broke. Not once. He never stopped caring for his people, and he never stopped delivering the message. And this leads us to fundamentally redefine the very concept of success. Today, we're so used to worldly success, right? A metric that's entirely measured by numbers, appreciation, follower counts, financial gain, or fleeting popularity. If you judge Nuh by our modern worldly metrics, after 950 years of effort, you might actually mistakenly think he failed, because out of an entire nation, only a small group chose to follow him. But true success? It's something entirely different. True success is simply obedience to Allah and remaining faithful to your purpose. Allah honored Nuh not for his follower count or some sort of viral popularity, but for his unwavering faithfulness. In our own lives, we might do the right thing and receive zero appreciation for it. We might stand up for the truth and find ourselves standing completely alone. But Nuh teaches us a remarkably liberating truth. Never measure your success by people's reactions. Measure it by your obedience to your Creator. And because of that unyielding obedience, just look at Nuh's enduring legacy. Peace be upon Nuh among all peoples. The people who mocked him, they're long gone, lost to the waters. The powerful elites who rejected his message, swept away without a single trace. But the name of Nuh remains preserved forever. Every single time his story is recited by millions around the globe, we remember a deeply humble, profoundly resilient servant who absolutely refused to give up calling people to his Lord. The story of Nuh in the Great Flood is almost complete, but one massive question remains as we look forward. What actually happened to humanity after the flood? How did human civilization restart and spread out from that single mountain peak? What does the Qur'an tell us about the generations that came immediately after Nuh? And why exactly is he called a grateful servant? We're going to bring together the timeline, the places, and the most powerful message from this entire epic in our next explainer. I hope this deep dive has brought a whole new level of reflection to this incredible narrative for you. Keep learning, keep reflecting on these stories, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Today we're looking at a story that sits right at the very foundation of human history, the Great Flood, the Ark, the survival of the believers. Prophet Nuh, peace be upon him, carried out what is undeniably one of the most monumental missions ever placed on a human being. But here's the thing. The Qur'an didn't preserve this account just to hand us a history lesson about some ancient flood. Not at all. It preserved his legacy specifically for us, sitting right here today.
Picture this. The waters have finally receded. The ark has safely come to rest on Mount Al-Judi. The few believers who actually followed him just survived the most catastrophic event the earth had literally ever seen. The physical event was completely over. But Nuh's story? It wasn't finished. There's this massive dramatic shift here from an ancient historical event to a timeless reality. His legacy was cemented to serve as a mirror for every single generation that followed, right down to you and me in the modern world.
So here is our roadmap for today. We're going to explore his enduring legacy, the whole illusion of numbers when it comes to truth, and how faith is ultimately a personal choice. Then we'll touch on obedience, mockery, and patience, Allah's ultimate promise, and finally wrap up with a real warning for today.
All right, kicking things off with Part 1, the enduring legacy, and exactly why his story remains so relevant.
If you look at chapter 37, verse 79 of the Qur'an, it says, "Peace be upon Nuh among all peoples." After absolutely everything he went through, the mockery, the harsh rejection, just the sheer exhaustion of it all, Allah honored him with this eternal greeting. And his enemies, the ones who laughed at him, they completely vanished from history. But let's be honest, human nature doesn't really change. Arrogance, blind following, rejecting the truth just because we don't like the messenger, we see these things every single day. And that is exactly why this specific Quranic preservation matters so much right now.
To really wrap our heads around the weight of this legacy, just take a look at this timeline. Look at step 1, the call. 950 years. Just imagine preaching day and night, publicly, privately, for literally nearly a millennium. And this was followed by relentless rejection and decades of brutal mockery. Then came building the ark in pure obedience, facing a flood with waves described as being like mountains, and finally, salvation. Condensing his struggle down into these 5 points just shows us the staggering, almost incomprehensible scale of his mission before we even dive into the specific lessons.
Moving on to Section 2, Truth Against the Majority and the Illusion of Numbers.
You know, shirk, associating partners with Allah, it didn't just happen overnight. As recorded in Sahih al-Bukhari, the people initially just wanted to remember righteous individuals who had passed away. Good intentions, right? But generations passed, original knowledge was lost. Eventually, that reverence morphed into worship, and idols were born. The crucial takeaway here is that taking small, seemingly harmless steps away from Tawheed, from the oneness of Allah, can snowball into monumental disasters for future generations.
And during all of this, Nuh preached for 950 years. I mean, just let that number sink in for a second. Chapter 29, verse 14 tells us that duration, and chapter 11 tells us that despite this unimaginable time frame, only a few believed. Think about the sheer duration of his constant, incredibly patient effort compared to that tiny number of followers. It perfectly sets up a stark contrast with how we often think today.
We hear this all the time in modern society, don't we? If everyone's doing it, it's got to be right. Or the flip side, if only a few people believe it, it must be weird or wrong. But Nuh's reality completely shatters that idea. Truth is not decided by a majority vote. Even if only a handful of people on the entire planet are following the truth, it remains the absolute truth. Numbers do not validate reality. Allah's revelation does.
Which brings us to Section 3, faith is a personal choice. Because at the end of the day, family alone cannot save you.
This quote from chapter 11, verse 46 comes right as the flood is taking over. It's truly heartbreaking. Nuh was a mighty prophet of Allah, yet his own son rejected faith. And when the cataclysm hit, being the son of a prophet did absolutely nothing to save him. The hard truth here is that faith is entirely personal. Your parents can't believe for you, your righteous friends can't save you, your family lineage means absolutely nothing if your own heart is detached from Allah. You have to make the choice to turn to Him yourself.
Next up, Section 4, Obedience, Mockery, and Patience. This is all about trusting the command.
Sometimes you understand the wisdom after you obey. Really think about that for a second. Nuh began building a massive ship on dry land long before a single drop of floodwater had arrived. He didn't demand a full, peer-reviewed scientific explanation of how the flood would happen before he picked up a hammer. No. When the command from Allah is clear, true believers just submit. They obey first, they trust the Creator completely, and the wisdom, that unfolds later.
And naturally, because he was building an ark on dry land, he faced this, chapter 11, verse 38. Whenever the chiefs of his people passed by him, they mocked him. Imagine being laughed at every single day for doing what you know in your heart is right. We face this today too, right? People might laugh at you for stepping away to pray, for dressing modestly, or for avoiding something haram in your business. But always remember this: people's opinions are temporary. They change with the wind. Allah's truth does not change. Never let the mockery of people stop your obedience.
But here is the truly amazing part. Despite all of this, the brutal rejection, the daily mockery, the literal centuries of hardship, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, described Nuh as a grateful servant. We find this in Sahih al-Bukhari. This brilliantly highlights that gratitude isn't just for when you get a promotion or when life is a breeze. True gratitude is an anchor for your heart, an attitude that remains rock steady even during your absolute hardest trials.
Section 5. The ultimate promise. Nothing, and I mean nothing, overpowers his command.
The flood that seemed completely impossible for centuries finally arrived. The earth cracked open with water, the skies poured down, the waves were literally like mountains. No human power, no vast wealth, no army on earth could stop it, and then, just as swiftly, Allah commanded, "O earth, swallow your water, and O sky, withhold your rain," and it just stopped. The absolute, undeniable power of Allah's word is on full display here. When Allah decrees a matter, it is absolute. Human control is just an illusion.
Finally, Section 6, a warning for today. The final message we need to take away.
The Qur'an makes it clear there are signs in this story for us. It demands that we hold a mirror up to our own lives. Are we actually accepting the truth, or are we pushing it away just out of pure pride? Are we acting like the stubborn people of Nuh who thought they had all the time in the world? Or are we acting like the believers who submitted to the truth even when it was incredibly unpopular?
Look at this breakdown. It's honestly perhaps the greatest takeaway from this whole explainer. Really think about what Noah actually controlled: his obedience, his patience, and his sincere dawah. That is it. Now, what did Allah control? The flood, the salvation of the believers, and the ultimate outcome. Noah didn't control the results. He just trusted Allah and put in the work. Allah took care of the rest. And guys, that is exactly how we have to approach our own lives.
So, as we wrap up, I want you to really ask yourself these questions. What is Allah asking you to change right now? What hard truth in your life are you actively avoiding? What good habit are you putting off for tomorrow? The people of Nuh laughed at the warning simply because they thought they had time. So the final, most crucial question is, if Allah has shown you the truth, will you follow it before it's too late? Because ultimately, the story of Nuh isn't just about a massive ship or a historic flood. It's a literal blueprint for a lifetime of tawheed, incredible patience, and absolute trust in Allah.